Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
Yar, and I'm Alton Gansky, a day late on Talk Like a Pirate. And that's it. That's all the humor I have. I'm the author of about 50 books and some other types of writing, too. And always good to be back, even if I have missed Talk Like a Pirate Day. So.
I have a feeling you're going to make up for it here tonight, aren't you? I'm Molly Jo Reilly. I am producer of the podcast. I am also the author, compiler of the Unemployment Cookbook and the upcoming mystery location novel, NOLA.
And I still think that we need a national Talk Like Christopher Walken Day.
Oh my gosh.
I think that would be even better than Pirates. And so...
I give us a sample, Aaron, since you're the leader of the Talk Like Christopher Walken fan club.
You know, I can't do it on command. If I did, it would be amazing. Okay, I'm going to edit that out. That was awful. I still
Try
think
it again.
If Christopher Walken and James T. Kirk ever had a baby, that poor kid would probably never say anything. You know, just anyhow.
Really, that's the thing about. That would worry you, that if James T. Kirk and Christopher Walken had a baby, that would be the thing you would think about.
That poor child would be ringing a cowbell here and there. And just
he said cowbell.
Cowbell. Okay. All right, enough of that. Moving on. Thanks for joining us.
Now you guys have to Google Christopher Walken cowbell skit.
There you go.
Great.
It's worth your while. And if you are joining us on YouTube, we do ask that if you want to participate in our chat room, that's over at aarongansky.com now. So you just go to aarongansky.com, click on the FIF Live link, and boom, there you are. You got your chat room all loaded up there below the video. And if you keep looking below the chat room, you'll see a little box in which you can put in your email address and subscribe to the Firsts in Fiction podcast newsletter, which I probably should have sent out last week and I didn't. But I promise I will remember to do that. I'll have to set a reminder. And by me, I mean Molly. And so Molly, there you go. She's got it all set up to at least remind me to do that. And so that's how you'll do that if you want to.
Podcast. Okay, we're good.
Thank you, Siri. I didn't know you were going to do it on the air. That's fantastic. So there's
Siri says you're welcome.
Excellent. So if you are on YouTube, though, we do ask that you click that thumbs up button. Helps us out quite a bit. And also the subscribe button. We're getting ever closer to that magical 100 number. Looking forward to when we finally hit that prestigious mark. And that'd be fantastic. So do that if you don't mind. And I think that's all that I needed to say about our new look. Things seemed to go well last week. So... hooray. Hooray, hooray. Let's move on to Ask the Author, shall we?
We shall.
We shall. So another one from Jacqueline Patterson. And I promise that she's not going to be the official Ask the Author questionnaire. We do have one more who's going to ask a question next week. But other than that, she might be. And that's good because she's got good questions. Tonight, she wants to know, is a blog necessary for an unpublished author? And wow, what a great question. Pops, I think I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder when I say this should be a podcast topic in and of itself. But we don't have time for that tonight, so I'm going to keep it short. The answer, Jacqueline, is, of course, no. Also, the answer is yes. So now that that's abundantly clear, we'll just move on, shall we? All right.
Wait.
It really depends. What?
I'm a little confused.
Oh,
you said yes and then you said no, or you said no and then you said yes. I can translate you pretty well, but most of the general public can't. So could you clarify that for people who don't crawl into your brain?
Sure. The answer is no and yes. All right.
Thanks.
So it really depends on how serious you are, number one, and number two, exactly how unpublished you are. That term unpublished is... covers a lot of ground. My 8-year-old son is unpublished, but he is writing his first book. I just thought I'd put that out there on air so everybody knows.
Nice.
Writing his first book, and I'm so proud of him. But he's unpublished. And my guess is that he's probably not going to be published anytime soon. So I think a blog for him is a little bit early. Of course, for him, the focus is going to be on becoming a better writer, learning the language, those types of things. And that's going to be his focus. Once you are a strong enough writer, however, and I would maintain that if you are actively submitting for publication, that you should have a blog rolled out. They're very easy to do. You can get one on WordPress. You may want to pay a little bit of money and get your own domain. But are so many services out there that allow you to put together a really inexpensive, really easy to format blog, much like aarongansky.com, in which case you can do a weekly blog or whatnot. The advantages to this is that publishers want to know that you've already built a readership. And if you don't have a lot of stuff published, well, guess what? A blog is publication. Technically, it's self-publication, but that's not necessarily a thing. If you've got regular followers, you're more attractive to publishers. And so they want to know that you've got a readership so that you're less risky as an unpublished author. The sooner you can start building one, the better. Of course, if you're not active on the blog, it can kind of work against you. It's not going to do you any good to start a blog, write 2 or 3 posts and then abandon it. There, you're not building a readership. You're teaching your readers that you're not really that serious about it. So you want to make sure that if you're going to do it, that you're going to be consistent with it, that you're going to commit to it. Otherwise, the blog is just not going to do anything for you. The other thing that you'll want to do if you're starting a blog is putting up some good content. And this is not necessarily about writing. You don't have to write about writing, even though I do. That's what I know best. I've often played with the idea of creating a Magic the Gathering blog because it's something else that I enjoy and spend a lot of time with.
Why have we not discussed this before?
The amount of time that it would take is really been the thing that has dissuaded me from that. But if I did, that would allow me to cross-pollinate my blogs, and so my MTG readers would come over and read about writing, perhaps, or my latest book, and vice versa. And so that can actually help to build. Doing guest blogs for other people who have established blogs, even if you don't have your own, if you're doing kind of a blog tour where you're putting up guest blogs here and there, that can also be beneficial. But if you're looking for publication, I think you want to have your own, probably your own domain, so that you look like a professional, you treat yourself like a professional, you act like a professional, you present yourself like a professional, and then the publisher will know that you are a professional, even if you don't feel like it. A lot of writers feel that since they are not published, that they're not professional writers because they're not getting paid. If you're good, publication will eventually come. And if you present yourself as a real writer, you're going to write like a real writer. And so you want to get in that mindset. You want to get past that voice in the back of the head that says you're no good. It probably won't go away anytime soon because I think we all still hear it from time to time. But for the most part, we just have gotten very good about telling it to shut up and doing our business. Representing yourself as a writer, acting like a writer. One of the ways that you do that is by having a blog and being able to have that ready in case publishers want to take a look at whatever you're producing, an article, be it an article or a short story or a poem or a novel. It's going to really help out. So no and yes. Pops, since I was not super clear, maybe you could clarify a little bit more.
Yeah, I didn't even know where to start when I first read the question because I have mixed emotions about it, but I'll give it a shot here. I'll step up to the plate. I do agree. It'd probably make a pretty good podcast episode because there's so much more to it. So I did what I usually do. I started doing a little bit of research. And here's the problem when you start researching the number of blogs and the number of posts is they are sometimes driven by, the people who do them have an agenda. So you never quite know if you're getting the truth, and it's hard to verify some of the things. But I'm going to give you some anyway. Tumblr, for example, says it has, I believe, 305.9 million blogs on their service. Now, to give that some perspective, there are 318 million people in the United States. So that's roughly one blog for every person in the United States, man, woman, and child. Now, of course, there they're international. They don't mean just in the United States. But the point is, that's an awful lot. But if you do more research, and you'll start finding out that maybe there's even more well beyond that. So many sources list about 152 million blogs. 152 million blogs. And there's roughly a new blog post posted every half second on the blogosphere. It's not in any particular country, but that's one of the beautiful things about blogs is it's international. You're publishing internationally, globally. So I tell you all that to make this point. Everyone thinks I start a blog, people are going to flock to it, and it will build my street cred, and I'll have followers, and then I will have in those followers people who will buy books and so on. The truth is the competition is enormous, and lots and lots of blogs just stop being active with that. So at some point, a decision has to be made. What is the best use of my time? Now, I don't do much blogging. I did for years a thing called Imagination at Work, and then I made it in some of my favorite blog posts I turned into a book, which you can get for free. You go to Amazon, look up my name, look for Imagination at Work with a little light bulb on the cover, and
can I pause you real quick, Pops?
Yeah.
Okay. On that note, I just heard from one of our listeners that they are currently reading that and loving it, and it's changing the way they think. Wanted to throw my agent, actually, Dave Fessenden, and so he wanted me to. I don't know if I forwarded you that message or not, but okay. So for our listeners, it's life changing, and that's not coming from us. That's from our listeners. So free book for life changing ramifications, life changing results. I think that's pretty solid. I'm sorry, Pops. Go ahead.
No, that's right. Yeah, and it's an ebook. So, but it's been out for a long time. And I enjoyed that, but I did spend a lot of time doing research, coming up with topics. The purpose of the blog wasn't just about me, it was about creativity. And so that's what I blogged about, creativity. And every once in a while I think about starting that up again. The question is, from a writer's point of view, did it get readers for me? And that's hard to say. I can track how many people come to the site. I can see how many read that page, or at least landed on that page. So anyway, I'm giving a long answer, which we Ganskys apparently like to do, for a short question. I'm giving a long answer. I would say this: blogging can be useful because it can teach you discipline. If you have meaningful stuff to say, you can build a huge audience. The person that I did my writers conference with, Edie, has a huge following of writers, but she works it constantly. So yes, you can do that. Some do. Some go on to make it a profession, or they get hired to be writers, especially like tech journals and stuff like that. So it can have that, but then you also have to ask, how much of your creative juices are you going to spend on that? You get the same amount of time every day as everyone else, and how much of that time do you want to spend writing blogs, especially if there aren't many people who are going to read them? So it is a tough call, and I really don't know how to answer that other than to say, before you make a big commitment to a blog, social media really is pretty much the way to get to people, because most of the postings, like in Facebook, Google Plus and stuff, are pretty short. And you can do video, and you can do all kinds of different things. So it's multimedia. You could do that on a blog, too, if you want to go through those steps. But as far as promoting yourself and promoting a book, social media might be better than a blog, but a blog has perhaps other advantages. So if you have something to say and your goal isn't just to get attention for yourself, then a blog is a good way to go. Many people use blogs as a way of, as bait. Come see what I have to sell. I've posted this, you'll love it. Come see what you won't believe what I just discovered. Come read this, and while they're there, then you can see what it is they have to sell. So I would suggest not being one of those, but it never hurts to have people following you when your book comes out.
So every publisher I've ever talked to has asked the question, how many followers do you have on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and blah, 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 and are you active on these social media sites, etc.? That is a very big point, Pops, to make, and thank you for reminding us of that. It's not all about blogging. It is about being active on social media, as Molly might attest to. But I'm going to mention, I hate to belabor the point, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. very quickly, because maybe we'll go into this more depth. It sounds like this could be a wild card episode for us. Mention a couple people. First of all, Lori Roeleveld,
Oh my
pops, who
goodness.
you know.
Yes.
And she is one of the premier bloggers, I think. And I believe I'd have to talk to her, but she's a Patriot fan, and the Patriots just beat the Dolphins, so I may not be able to talk to her for another few weeks.
I'm texting her right now. Dear
Okay.
Lori.
Yeah.
Are you still talking to Aaron?
Oh, she'll talk to me.
Is Aaron still talking to you?
But she says, I believe, if I remember, that the blogging was something that she did just to try and get a readership. But what it turned into for her was a book contract, several book contracts, actually. She's done a couple books that have been pulled from the material that she's done from her blog. And her blog has, she's had posts that have gone viral and over 1 million hits and things of that nature. She's got a really good readership. She's been voted as one of the top Christian bloggers in the nation, and all these wonderful things, because she's been committed to it, and she puts in the time and the effort and the energy. And also she's just a really fantastic writer. But what she's writing about is not necessarily writing about writing or whatnot. It's about these deep spiritual matters. And she does it in such a way that she really connects with her readership.
And that goes back to what I was getting at, is if you have something to say, then a blog is a great means of getting that out, especially if it's going to be longer than what you'd want to put in a Facebook post. So that's what she has. She's an encourager. She's brilliant. Yeah. And she's one of my favorites. I need to tell the story sometime. We ought to have her on. Well, she was on a long time ago, sometime in the back, go way back a couple of years of these, and you'll find that we had her on. But she's absolutely brilliant at what she does. And she has a way of writing that sounds like somebody sitting across the table from you, having a cup of coffee with you, and is nonetheless the wisest person, not only in the room, but probably in the state. And so you want to listen. Most people who blog don't have that kind of issues. By issues, I mean issues to share. They don't have that kind of motivation to meet a particular need. That happened to work very well in what she would do, or what she would call her ministry, and reaching out to these people. Now, along with that, the book The Martian, which I think did all right. I think they sold a couple of those books.
2 or 3.
I've heard about it.
Yeah. I believe he was publishing those chapters online in a blog. And then there are other people who have done that also, and then it takes off. But then again, there's a lot of people who have put a lot of time into that, and it hasn't worked out. So you just have to be wise about it. And if you think it might be for you, then is one of my axioms is you can't hit a home run from the dugout. So step up to the plate if you think it's going to do some good, but don't do it as a knee-jerk reaction. It is true, publishers will want to know about your social media outreach, not necessarily your blogs numbers. So, but that'll vary from publisher to publisher too.
And I'll just throw a couple things out here. First of all, Jacqueline, I've read your writing. I think you're at a point where you can start thinking about a blog. You're a very gifted writer and very clean prose. And so don't fall into the trap that thinking you're not ready for it. You're not at that point. If you've got something to say it. I'm going to cite Molly here as an example, and I know she's probably, hopefully she's comfortable with it here, but your blog, you blog not just about writing and stuff. You'll put up posts about New Orleans. You'll put up posts about food, and because you've got the cookbook.
Yes.
You've got you put up things about spiritual issues, and you've had quite a few posts that have really gotten the attention of quite a few readers. And so really your blog, and I think some of the best blogs have this in common, your blog is very much a window into who you are. Think about all the mommy bloggers out there, parenting blogs, all these types of travel blogs, and these often will turn into paying gigs or book contracts and things of that nature. So it's definitely something to think about. If you just started writing, probably not the time. If you've been writing for a number of years and you're consistent with it and you're getting some good feedback from some professionals, maybe it's time to start thinking about something. I just want to spend more time on this. We're going to table this. Molly, please remind me at the end of the show to add this to our list of wildcard topics.
Absolutely.
We've got one for tomorrow. So maybe what we'll do is
for next week.
For next month, maybe.
We're not coming back tomorrow, right? You said tomorrow.
Oh, gee whiz.
Yeah, we are, and you're supposed to bring the pizza.
Yeah, you didn't hear? You didn't get the memo?
I didn't get the memo. I am, however, selling chili, so, I can bring you guys chili.
We should probably do a better job of keeping our producer in the loop. Okay, no, we're not actually casting tomorrow. Next week, we've got a wild card topic, which you'll hear about at the end. So maybe in October, we'll do the blogging one. So really great question. All right, moving on. Back to dialogue, shall we? Let's have a dialogue about
dialogue.
So anyhow, moving on.
How did I know that you were going to say that?
You know what this cast needs? It needs more cowbell. Gotta have more cowbell. All right, 2 weeks ago, we took a look at how to make dialogue sound authentic without actually being authentic. That was a fun one. If you get a chance, go back and watch that on YouTube if you haven't seen it already. Last week, we talked about the top mistakes new writers make when writing dialogue. And tonight, we're looking specifically at how to tag our dialogue appropriately and efficiently. And so we're going to be using a couple terms tonight. We're going to use the term dialogue tag, possibly use the term dialogue attribution, which is going to be the same thing. And for the purposes of our discussion, so you know, when we say something like Tom said or Billy said or Sally said, that's an attribution or a tag. It's simply tagging who's saying what. Contrast that with the term that we use called a beat, sometimes called an action beat if you really want, or in some cases perhaps an emotional beat or an interior monologue beat. It's the idea of, rather than saying Tom said, Sally said, you put in some sort of action or thought process or a description of something nearby. And we'll talk about ways to do that. So that's going to be more of what we're talking about when we say tag. Now, Pops, you mentioned this last week that there's a couple things to remember with these. The first is that if they're used properly, the reader never gets lost. If attributes and beats are used properly, no one is ever going to be confused about who's speaking when. The second thing to remember is that they're often overused. We put in a lot more than we actually need, especially of dialogue tags. We put in a lot more of those. I don't know if it's something about the writing process where we feel like we need it, or if we just want to feel like our reader needs to be reminded. But I know for me, I definitely put in way too many tags, and I have to go back and just cut them all. Pops, would you say that's something that you feel like too? Do you overuse them?
Yeah, and I've gone back over some of my older books and republish, and I change them and stuff like that. And I will notice that in my earlier books, I used the attributions, the tags, more frequently, and that's even after they've been edited. Now, it's not horrible, but it's more than I like to do now. I think we learn to do it because when we learn to read as children, and we're having to learn what dialogue is, what a quotation mark is. C spot run, C spot jump, jump spot, Jane said, jump, jump. We start thinking that those tags need to be there for all dialogue, and it doesn't. As long as the reader knows who's speaking, then you're good. If there's a chance they're going to be confused, and we'll reiterate this, then you need to address that. So tags are not evil. It's just when they're overused. It's too much salt in the soup. Well said.
He said
I always...
Food reference.
Yeah. We use a lot of food references here. So I wonder what that says about us as people.
We're always hungry.
It says that Molly has a cookbook for sale on Amazon called the Unemployment Cookbook. As long as we're in the business of pitching books here.
Oh, good. You understood what I was trying to say. Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by
the Unemployment
We should totally do that.
Okay.
We could put that on our lower third, and then Molly could pay us lots of money to do it.
How about Molly makes you chili once a month?
That sounds reasonable.
Okay.
That sounds reasonable. So now we have talked about beats, and I just kind of want to give an example. I gave an example of attributions. Tom said, Sally said. What I find people doing is using beats and tags together. So they'll say something like, So just the beat or just the tag might say Tom said. The beat might be Tom clenched and unclenched his fists. I'm getting very tired of this conversation. The tag/beat combo would be Tom clenched and unclenched his fists and said, I'm getting very tired of this conversation. Or I'm getting very tired of this conversation, comma, Tom said, and clenched and unclenched his fists. I've seen that. I typically think that that's unnecessary unless you're doing it for a very specific reason, like you need the extra time, you want the rhythm of the language or something like that. But for the most part, I think tags and attributes tags and beats should be separated. That's one thing I find myself doing is the tag beat combo. Pops, do you do that at all?
I try not to. You mean where it says Tom said grinning? Or Tom said as he set his cup down? No, that's done a lot. I advise against it. I think it's awkward. You don't need to say said, because remember, that's what quotation marks mean. So it's redundant to say Tom said. We just need to make sure the reader knows that it's Tom who's doing the speaking. So you could have Tom's statement and then use the beat, and the beat is Tom set his coffee cup down. As long as it's on the same line as the dialogue, then the reader knows that it's Tom who made that comment.
Unless you're Cormac McCarthy, in which case you just don't use quotation marks because you're too good for them.
Really?
It's a thing. Yeah, Cormac McCarthy, one of the masters of dialogue, and he doesn't use quotation marks. I'm not sure what to say about that other than he's really good with tags and attribution, or tags and beats. He knows how to make it work. So good for him.
And maybe that's what he's doing. He's saying, I'm giving you a beat to tell you who it is. What do I need quotation marks for? Or the one that always gets me, and sometimes you have to do it, and it always galls me when I have to do it, but I've done it many times, is where are you going, question mark, he asked. Well, that's what the question mark means. That's what the stinking question mark is there for. You don't have to tell me that he asked. But sometimes sometimes you have to do something like that so they understand who's doing the talking. And usually it's when you have 3, 4, 5 people in a room, something like that, chatting, or in a car. Somehow you have to identify them, and you're going to mix up the tags and the beats to help get that identification across. But that one has been bugging me the last few years, and I do my best to get away from it. Can't always do it, but I try to minimize the damage.
Yeah. So what I do in that situation is I'll usually front load it. And so tags don't always come after the dialogue. They can sometimes precede it. Sure. He asked, comma, what's wrong, Sally? Question mark. And so there you have asked and the question mark, a little further separated. But you're right, it is a little bit redundant. And if you only have the 2 people, you really don't need it. Most of us mortals, unlike Cormac McCarthy, still use quotation marks, so those are going to do some work for us. But
even in that example, Aaron, you don't have to say he asked. You would say he studied her. What's wrong? Question mark.
And there you're using the beat instead of the tag, and which is fine.
To get rid of asked, yeah.
To get rid of asked. If, however, all of your characters start studying each other as if they are preparing for an exam, then we've got issues.
A little creepy.
That's
that's a Twilight Zone or something.
That is an important point. That's one of the things I think we have a little further down, but let's go ahead and make it now, is if you use too many tags, you weaken your writing. If you use too many beats, you weaken your writing. I always think of it as a recipe. You use what you need to get the job done, but nothing more. You're not going to put a pound of yeast in to make a loaf of bread, unless you want it to be the size of your house. You use what is necessary to get the idea across. So that's really what it is. And I'm going to mention this a little bit later again as a reminder, but let me go ahead and say it now. My fear is this: when people listen to this kind of stuff, is they get bogged down. They get involved in the paralysis of analysis. So they're trying to write their first draft and going, wait a minute, should I use that word asked? Do I have the word said too many times? Or maybe I should use a beat here. Your first draft isn't for that. Your first draft is for telling the story. Your second draft is for telling the story well. So that's when you go back and you clean those kinds of things up. If you get too zeroed in on them, you'll just bind up. There's too many planes coming in at Chicago O'Hare Airport at one time. Don't do that. Get the story down, then go back and touch it up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. So if we were to give some rules here for using dialogue tags, I always use rules in quotation marks here because we're talking about dialogue, so why not? Okay. Rules for dialogue tags. We've already kind of mentioned this. You want to use them sparingly. Really, like you already said, Pops, if we've got more than 2 people, they become a little more necessary. If we only have 2, we need them seldom, if ever. I've seen entire pages of dialogue without a single tag or attribution, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. As long as we can follow what's going on, it's fine. Tags really exist just to orient the reader. That's really the only purpose they serve. So as the number of characters increases on stage or on the page, as that increases, you're going to need some more tags. And that's fine because readers are going to accept that because they understand. I've got a lot of people in a room in a book I'm currently writing, a lot of people, and my only thought was, man, I really got to start killing these people off. You know, I just all of a sudden it became a serial killer in my head. I'm like, well, I could kill them and I could kill them, and here's how I could kill them. And it was really strange and awkward and unsettlingly very unsettling. Or unsettlingly not unsettling. There we go. That was a joke I was trying to make there.
A little bit afraid of you now, and really glad that there's at least 25 miles from your place to this place.
So long as you're not in my book, you should be fine.
Yeah, that too.
And now you know why I live 4 hours away. So
I haven't killed anybody in weeks. Now, moving on. Sorry, that got weird. Said and asked, talking about tags, and we mentioned this some weeks ago. Said and asked are really all you need. Occasionally we talked about the rule is if it changes the way you read what's in the quotation marks, you might want to change said or asked. Look out, he whispered. Normally we're going to read look out as an exclamation, something very loud, but if they're in a situation where they have to be quiet and they can't be detected, instead of using the word said, you might use the word whispered, but only if it's going to change the way the reader interprets what's inside the quotation marks. Avoid the temptation to add in adverbs and distracting verbs. Tom exclaimed wildly. I think I've mentioned Poe had, so-and-so gesticulated wildly, and it gets to be to where the verbs and the adverbs are now taking attention away from what's in the dialogue, what's within the quotation marks, and really what's in the quotation marks should be the focus of the reader. Dialogue, we want to hear it. We don't want to read it. And I know that sounds weird, but whenever you start using words that call attention to the fact that somebody's reading a book, it's breaking that fictive dream. And so you want to avoid that. Stick with said and asked. They do become invisible to the reader. The reader will ignore them. If, however, you're listening to an audiobook, all of a sudden, they're all there, every single one of them. And I noticed this reading The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien and then listening to it. Very different experience. When I read it, I don't think I noticed a single dialogue tag. When I listened to it, I noticed every single one of them. It didn't detract from my enjoyment of the presentation by any stretch of the imagination, but I did realize them. I remember thinking, wow, there's a lot of them in here. If you're reading your work out loud, as some writers do before they send it off for publication to check for errors and the like, you're probably going to notice a lot of those tags. If you find that you have too many tags in your writing, read it out loud. It's a really good way to find them all.
Or have your computer read it to you. Most computers will read to you now. Text to speech. If you don't know how to do that, go to your help menu and look up TTS, text to speech, or spell it out, and it will tell you how to turn that on. It's usually in whatever section they call it for where they're helping people who are blind. So it's not accessibility.
Accessibility options, yeah. The other thing that you can do, I believe there's a program called Balabolka, which is Balabolka. Balabolka. I'll try and put that in the show notes. That I use. It's free. You got different voices that you can choose from. You can change the pitch and the range. And what I really like about it is you can convert it to MP3. You can take an entire document and convert it to MP3. So if I've been out of a book for a while, as sometimes is the case when you're working on a project and then you have to finish another project. So you switch and then you come back to the original one. That's actually happened to me several times. I'll just take the text that I've already written, the half a novel, the half a manuscript, the 3/4 of a manuscript, put it into MP3 format and listen to a soulless robot read it on my daily commute in or from work, which is a lot shorter now than it used to be. But or I'll do it, when I'm doing dishes or vacuuming or other manly sports like that, to keep myself in shape. I got to keep the girlish figure here. So I'm going to put that in the show notes here real quick.
You do that.
Bolka. And if you just do a search for it on Google, I'm sure it'll pop up. So another rule here for dialogue tags is only use one per line of dialogue. I've got the disease, and I mentioned this last week, where I will write lines like, Lauren said, "Why would you say something like that? She asked, don't you know how much that hurts me?" And so now I've used 2 dialogue tags for what should be 1 line of dialogue. I really don't need the Lauren said at the beginning. I might keep the she asked in the middle if I want to break it up and have her kind of pause in between those sentences. So I might use that for rhythm's sake. But for the most part, I would probably just want to keep Lauren said or she asked. One should come at the beginning, one should come at the end, but never both in the same line of dialogue. What happens is you're just using additional words for absolutely no reason, and it can become distracting, and it will often become confusing because readers have been trained that one dialogue tag per line of dialogue. If I have Lauren said and she asked, all of a sudden especially if there's another girl in the room, now I'm wondering, is this other girl talking? When it says she, is it talking about Lauren or is it talking about this other girl? So you want to avoid some confusion by limiting yourself to 1 dialogue tag per line. Did I forget anything about dialogue tags?
No, again, the big thing is to use as few as possible, but don't use so few that your reader gets lost. That's the real crime. So these are not evil things. Again, it's just you don't want to make the seasoning the meal. Another food reference. That's what dialogue tags are. If you have too many stop signs and too many traffic signs, I should say, on a road, it's very hard to keep track of all of them and to know what's going on. And that's the same thing with too many tags. It becomes very, very noticeable. And as Aaron said, if you listen to it, like out of Audible or something like that, or your computer's reading to you, you really notice them. Not so much if the person is reading, unless they're writers, and then they'll notice all of them.
There you go. You can also, if you really want to torture yourself, control find for said and asked, and then enjoy your next 3 weeks going through your manuscript. So I don't know that I've actually taken it to that extent. Normally on my read-through, I do a pretty careful read-through. Occasionally 1 or 2 will slip by, and my editor will be kind enough to, cross it out for me or something. But for the most part, I'm pretty good at finding them now because I've become very attuned to them. But I have eschewed them. Eschewed? Is that the word?
Eschewed.
Eschewed.
Chewed.
Yeah, so I put a shoe on them. That's what it means, isn't it?
No.
Eschewed them? I eschewed my horses this morning.
I thought it was you shooed them. Shoe
fly. I eschewed the fly. All right, moving on.
I think one of the things to remember, though, here in this is, again, they're not horrible. Just don't overdo them. So if you've been somewhat conscientious about it, you're probably fine. And if you're going through standard publishing, you're going to go through an editor too. So just don't overwhelm them. Do your best. Make sure you don't get lost. Because if you're lost, your reader's lost. But just because you have some doesn't mean you're committing a crime. It's if you just have one on every single piece of dialogue that it becomes very distracting and it bloats the book. Those things add up pretty quick.
It does. And I think we've mentioned on previous casts about dialogue, one of the things that you can do is make your characters speak differently. Give them different ways of speaking. In Hand of Adonai, Aiden is really the only one who says bro. So if it says bro within the dialogue, I don't need to tag it. Everybody knows who that is. and there are other things that you can do, little catchphrases, colloquialisms, things that you can add together that will indicate who is speaking. The other option is just to use beats. Use fewer beats than you use tags. That's, you know what, I'm going to take that back because that sounds like a lame rule. I tend to think that beats are better than tags. They are less distracting and they keep the reader oriented with things. So instead of just he said, she said, give us a bit of action or introspection or reflection or description. I should probably put that in the show notes, but action, introspection, reflection, or description. Those are 4 reasons why you might use a beat. Not necessarily just an action beat, but any sort of beat that's going to let the reader know who is speaking and also provide them with additional information. So avoid things, if we're talking about rules here, avoid any actions that are only there to tag the dialogue. So don't use unnecessary beats as tags. I often see things like Tom tapped his foot. No. Sam tapped his foot. Yes. Really? They're both tapping their foot? Like, that just seems weird. This is an indication here that you're probably going back to your same bag of tricks and you need a larger bag of tricks. And there's a bunch of them. If you've got one character that's doing it consistently, it's not necessarily a bad thing. For example, in Who is Harrison Sawyer, which releases on October 11th, by the way, my protagonist, Marshall Sawyer, often clears his throat when he's nervous or discontent. It's kind of a nervous habit. However, there are no other characters who are clearing their throats. That's just exclusive to him. Now, again, in real life, does more than one person clear their throat? Absolutely. But this is kind of a nervous tick, and so it becomes part of character development. And so I use it, but even on my second read through, I had overused it. And so I had to go back and trim it back quite a bit and limit it to when he's feeling particularly nervous or discontent or self-conscious. And so I had to really go through and ask if he's using it consistently. Am I overusing it? Am I going to, alienate the reader? Is the reader going to become upset with me for using it too much? But I have other characters, and those other characters are going to drum their fingers and fold their arms. Whatever it is that's natural for your character, that's something that you're going to want to kind of rely on and lean on. I'd also say intermix a little dialogue with your action. That is, put some action in there and then a little bit of dialogue. We've been talking this whole time and we think we've got long line of dialogue and little action for a beat. Instead, you could do longer action and a little dialogue, a little short clipped dialogue. It's not an either or. You can have an entire paragraph of action. Somebody is furiously cleaning their house. They're an angry cleaner, and so they are scrubbing the grout with an old nasty toothbrush and applying more Ajax and washing it down. And
I thought you weren't going to tell people how I do this.
Sorry, I just went for the low-hanging fruit. But then you can have short clipped dialogue where she simply says to the only other person in the room, fine. Well, we're going to read that and understand she's not fine. She is about to scrub the grout straight out of the counter. She's upset. And so that can be very powerful as well, trying to balance those or to do a lot of action and just a little bit of dialogue.
Sometimes we get the idea that beats are just things you use to substitute for tags, and that's really not the case. They do serve that purpose, but beats often keep the setting in the mind of the reader. So if you have somebody sitting, a group of people sitting in say a 1950s style diner, okay, the reader's going to expect a waitress to come and to go. You might even expect a little attitude from the waitress. You're going to hear the clashing of dishes. There's going to be hubbub going around. People are going to look at things. Those little beats where your character is noticing things keeps the reader in the scene, keeps them in that diner. So they're little reminders too. So they have more value than simply identifying who the speaker is. It's not just a straight substitution for tags. Some people try to use them that way, and that's just as bad, because then you're saying now you got too many beats. So we did talk about balancing them, but remember, a beat is going to have some purpose also. It's going to reveal something about the character, perhaps their emotion, perhaps whatever it is that startles them, but it's also going to keep the scene in the mind of the reader. So that's a good thing to use beats for. And they don't have to be very long. They're not long descriptions. They're just little bon mots of description.
But on the flip side of that coin, they can be longer, right? I often use beats to indicate the passage of time, to create silence without having to say they were silent. I had a professor at Antioch that brilliant man. And he said, okay, look, the world is never silent. Unless you're in a sensory deprivation chamber, the world is not silent. He said, let's all be quiet. Everyone got real quiet, not silent. He said, what do you hear? There's a refrigerator in the back of the room that's humming. There's a ceiling fan overhead that's humming. It's whirring. There's a cricket somewhere. Whatever the case is, there is some sort of auditory input. And we're very quick to say silent when things are rarely silent. And it's kind of if I can say it without sounding rude, it's a lazy way out. What you're trying to say is, my character didn't say anything. And instead, if you use the opportunity to provide a beat of description, that description, as you say, Pops, is going to keep the setting in the mind of the reader. It's also going to orient our expectations about how the characters are feeling. Like you say, Pops, if they're poking at their food, but they're never taking a bite, something's clearly wrong. So you might get something that sounds a little bit like this. How long are we going to argue? Tom asked. Next line. The ceiling fan spun in lazy circles. The refrigerator gurgled. Sally sat very still, her back straight. As long as we need to. So what we've done there is we've created time in between the question and the answer. And that's really what we want to do when we have, it's a great way to pace the dialogue. You can, on the flip side of the coin, you can also make things go quickly. An example from Leaving Tennessee, which is a short story that you can find in the bargain. And I think I mentioned this on a previous cast. We've got one character saying, you got out, talking about this town. He says, this road always reminds me you can never really get out of this town. She says, you got out. He says, and now I'm right back here. And she says, just for tonight. Just for tonight. He adjusted the rearview mirror. Sure. So putting in that little tag there, or I'm sorry, that little beat gives us a pause, a natural pause between him saying just for tonight and sure, which means that the reader is going to see the word sure with an edge of irony, a little bit of sarcasm in it.
And the key is not to fall into a pattern of using the same thing over and over. You bring up several of these. You mentioned smiling, for example, and I think you have a few others in the notes.
Yeah. Smiling. I hate you, he smiled. Probably not using that properly. Frowning, sighing, breathing. For me, shaking and nodding of the head. I like to joke that most of my characters start off as bobblehead dolls in early drafts. Just everybody shaking and nodding. Isn't it a nice day? He nodded. Sure it is.
Yeah, and one thing that some writers do is when they do that and they know that it's going to have to come out, they put a note. They put it in parentheses, or they turn the font red, or they highlight it or something. Says, I need a better beat here, and then they move on. You don't have to solve all the problems as they come up. You just have to solve them before you're done.
Absolutely, before anybody else sees them.
Yeah, before anyone else sees them.
Yeah, Al's axioms. That's a good Al's axiom. I actually, when I was using alpha readers before they got too busy and too good for me, I had one named Dennis Fulgoni. He's actually been on the show with us before. Brilliant man. And he constantly gets on me about some of the cliches that I use or some of the easy figurative language. And so I'll use a description, just the first thing that pops into my mind while I'm writing my first draft, and I just stop and I go, he's not going to let me get away with that. So I'll put a little note to him, and it just says, I know, I'll fix it later. And he just writes back, great. And, he's laughing about it. And he'll send me some of his work, and I'll see the same kind of comments like, yeah, no, I know what you're going to say. Don't worry. It's first draft. We'll get it later. But it's one of the things, I don't want to get too much into this idea of whether or not you should use alpha readers or beta readers. It worked out very, very well for me, but that's because I had really quality alpha readers, and we got to know each other and how each other worked and our expectations and what we looked for. And so it helped to have each other's voice in the back of our minds as we were writing. So it was a positive experience there. It doesn't always work, especially if you get a bad alpha reader, it can really ruin things for you. So Pops, like you say, use what works for you. But on that note, we want to avoid melodramatic cliches. So this is jaws dropping. I can't remember the last time I saw somebody's jaw actually drop. And then it was because they were a zombie and it became detached and fell to the ground.
Just going to say that.
I think it was on The Walking Dead. It's just the jaw-dropping action of The Walking Dead. Nostrils flaring. Are we describing a bowl? I know it happens in real life, but it feels in fiction like it's just really forced. These are kind of the easy descriptions that would never let me get away with. Shaking their fist in anger. I do that now in a mocking tone. People are like, I'm not happy. I'm like, well, shake your fist in anger. That's what everybody does, right? Those types of things. And then I get from Dennis lines like, his finger twitched like a caught fish. And I think, wow. I may be done writing. Like, I don't know how it's the pinnacle. That's it. That is perfect. And I started leaving him notes. I'm stealing this and claiming it as my own. So publish before me or perish, like those types of things. But reading that kind of stuff really opened up my mind to avoiding these melodramatic cliches that we use instead of, he said angrily. Well, what? Show don't tell. Oh, he shook his fist. Did he really? When was the last time you saw somebody actually shake their fist at someone else? I don't recall ever seeing that other than in melodramas. So trying to find a natural way to describe that sense of anger or discontentment is definitely something that you're going to want to do. Go ahead, Pops.
Okay, yeah. Just trying to see what we can get in the last few minutes that we have here. It's important not to overdo it. You make a good note of that. Less is more with emotion. Again, don't worry about this in first draft. This is when you go back and you fine tune. Think of the difference between first draft and later drafts as a sculptor working on marble. You get Michelangelo. Okay, when he does that, when he was doing that, he did not start at the top, chip away some marble, and get down to the real fine chiseling before he moved on. He blocked the thing out so that he could go in and do the fine chiseling. Writing's the same thing. Get your story done, then go back and rework it. Because your mind will be in a different mode than it is in creative mode. When you go back and start editing and revising, that's a different part of the brain. You can actually feel it sometimes. At least I can. But then again, who knows what that means with that. So don't overdo it. One of the people who used to really overdo it had a great editor, Max Perkins. And it was Thomas Wolfe. I just watched the movie Genius. It was a well-done movie if you're a writer. I'm not sure anyone. It never played here in Central California that I know of. So I had to get it offline to be able to watch it. But Wolfe loved the vast expression of emotion and internal dialogue and the flow of feeling, and he described all of it. And so when he brought his second book into Max Perkins, he brought in a 5,000-page book. It took several men to carry it in.
I would think so.
Wolfe used to write at the top of his refrigerator. He's a very tall man, and he wrote by hand, and he'd throw the paper down. He'd write, throw the paper down, write, throw the paper down. There's 5,000 pages, and so they set a goal. Max Perkins said, we want to reduce this a little to, say, 1,000 pages. So you can imagine taking out 4,000 pages. Well, he was just beside himself. He got to where he really hated it. But there's a great scene, and I only bring it up for this reason. is he was doing too much. And there's a long scene where they keep changing places. That is, the scene is carried over in multiple locations, where they're talking about this one scene where a guy sees this woman and falls in love. And when it was done, Max Perkins had got him to cut everything but one line. And it was like, yeah, I think he cut 30 pages on that one thing, got down to the one line with that, simply by saying, but that doesn't say what you want it to say. This is what you want the reader to understand, right? Yes. But, you know, he's the kind of guy that used a bulldozer to plant roses in his front yard. Just way over, and a lot of purple prose and stuff like that. Of course, he became quite famous, but it was also due to Max Perkins. I mean, he was a talented writer, but he just needed focus. And that's where really all of this is. When we're dealing with dialogue, we're trying to make sure the reader is focused. For the reader to be focused, we have to be focused.
It reminds me a little bit of Raymond Carver and Gordon Lish, and the relationship that they had, and how Carver earned a reputation as a minimalist only because Lish made him one. If you read Carver's later writing, he is far from a minimalist. But some argue that Lish's versions of Carver's stories are far superior, far stronger. It really depends on your preference, but he also is one who really scaled things back. And I think one of the ways that you can do that, if you are trying to kind of get this idea of the show don't tell, but also trying to get the most bang for your buck, trying to take the 30-page love scene and condense it down to one sentence, you got to focus on sensations, emotional sensations as physical sensations. And Pops, I think you were the one who told me that emotions are simply internal responses to outside stimulus. It's the way
it's a physical response, yeah.
Yeah, it's physical response to an outside stimulus. So if we're nervous, we feel that as like a flighty stomach. Butterflies, we're sweating, our hands are trembling. We're not going to use all of those in a tag or in a beat. We might just use one or two. Fear, quickened pulse, eyes are wide, skin is cold. Anger, the flushed face, increased pulse, throbbing temple, sadness, hot tears, trembling lip, etc. Just use one or two. You don't need more than that, but grab one of those as a beat. Tears stung the back of her eyes. I think I use that one quite a bit. And so I might have to search and make sure I'm not overusing it. But the physical sensation of what it feels like before, the moments before you cry, when you know it's going to happen. I want to focus in on that rather than tears streamed down her face, which is it's a little more melodramatic. And don't forget that thinking is appropriate too. And I think necessary in a lot of ways. Here's an example. Don't you like me? She asked. He did, but he couldn't tell her, wouldn't. She deserved to suffer the way she'd made him suffer. I don't. And so with something like that, the interior monologue gives us, again, information as a reader to orient how we're going to read what's inside that quotation mark. There's no action transpiring there. There's no fan spinning around. There's no refrigerator gurgling. It's simply an interior beat, interior monologue beat, which not only creates that moment of silence, but also helps us to better understand the thoughts of the character. And so that's another trick that you can use. Lastly, you want to use these beats to provide necessary exposition, orienting the reader in context of how they're supposed to read the dialogue. Our interpretation of what's in the quotation marks is largely dependent on the beats that you use. We understand what's inside the quotation marks by understanding what's outside the quotation marks. We've got just a minute or two left. Pops, you've got here some hints for practical writers that I like.
This is put in the pocket kind of stuff here. And we've touched on all of these, so I'm just going to run through them very quickly. So hints for the practical writer: don't dwell on all of this while you're doing your first draft, which we already said. Otherwise, you'll fall into the paralysis of analysis and you'll never finish. First draft is for telling the story. Subsequent drafts are for cleaning, restructuring, trimming. Or you could say the first draft is what a writer does. The second or third draft is what an author does. It's a different way of thinking. Be concise. It's only 2 words in that sentence. Be concise. If you can take a tag out, do it. If you take it out and things don't make sense anymore, put it back in. That or a beat if you haven't been using too many of those. Consider using a beat. Again, remember, using too many beats is the same thing as using too many tags. It's just clutter at that point. If your dialogue confuses you, it's confusing your reader. So pay attention to that. The ultimate goal is to remove anything that distracts or confuses the reader. Let the story flow. So, and the other thing I was thinking to me is Al's axiom: a writer doesn't drive his reader through the story. A writer leads his reader through the story. Say, look at this, pay attention to that, hear this. And so the reader is really all that matters. The story is what matters, but you want the reader to understand it, otherwise you're wasting time. So remove anything that distracts them from your point, the thing you're trying to show.
Well said, Pops. Molly, we had a chat room tonight. How did that go?
We did. We had a lot of fun in the chat room. It's going to take a while getting used to the chat. The only thing is that it's all ongoing. It's not going to be defined by a particular episode. So we have the chat from last week, and then I have to scroll and find the line of demarcation when we start for this week. So we had...
What I did is I put in the chat room T-4 minutes, and that was supposed to be the line of demarcation. I think next week I'll put that in big bold caps or something, so it's a lot easier to find.
That'd be awesome. Put it in there like 3 times with asterisks.
There we go.
We had Andy Clapp and Tess Moore in the chat room, so that was a lot of fun. Andy got the reference for the cowbell. So he said right off the bat, we need more cowbell. So, 10 points to Andy for picking up on that. We talked about the writing and who was doing what, referenced the other blogs, such as you referenced AaronGansky.com. I thought they should at least know we are also at FranklyMyDearMojo.com and AltonGansky.com.
Is this equal time now? Like we're all politicians and got to give everyone equal time?
Don't you ever call me a politician again, ever.
That was very dirty of me. I apologize. That may be the dirtiest thing I've ever called somebody. Wow. This is me trying to cover up for my mistake. I should have also mentioned your blogs as well. I apologize. I will go sit in the corner.
Okay, cool. So thanks. We talked about Tess DeGroot's website is tessdegroot.wordpress.com. She says only Kermit the Frog can gesticulate wildly, which is a very interesting visual. Other than that, the food references are great. We talked about the tags. Andy has said a couple of times that this was very helpful insight tonight, and it is making him a better writer. He really looks forward to these podcasts each week.
Likewise, I look forward to doing them. Andy's a great guy and participated in the book launch for Book of Things to Come, or the Blood Sword, which I was just looking at today because I owe people prizes for winning that I still haven't taken care of. So I'm a little bit late, and I'm trying to fix that. So, so Andy's a great guy. Glad to have him along. Glad he's listening. So, excellent stuff. Next week, we will be doing our wild card episode, which is going to be just
say no.
We're going to pull out a Nancy Reagan reference there, and other possible titles included rules that aren't, and kind of like Andrew Canebianco's Words That Aren't. It's a lot of fun website if you want to look into that. And Mythbusters Fiction Writing Edition. We're going to try that one, but I think we've decided Just Say No is going to be our title. Rules that you've heard that may not be very good to follow. And we wanted to do that after this week, after we gave you all these rules to follow for Dialog. Tune in next week so we tell you which ones we were just making up and you don't actually have to follow them. Spoiler alert, follow all the rules that we've ever given you. So don't forget to ask the author. You can do that right here on AaronGansky.com on the contact form. You can find us at AltonGansky.com, FranklyMyDearMojo.com, and at AaronGansky.com. So we thank you all for listening. And until next week, good writing.